Hey leaders, what happens when a school leader combines deep experience in inclusive education, a love for tech, and a passion for building team capacity? In this episode, we're going to explore just that.
Are you a leader who is navigating the nuances of leading collaborative response in your school or district? Are you unsure of what collaborative response is? Are you looking to understand the critical role leadership plays when establishing and refining a collaborative response approach?
Collaborative response began as a grassroots approach to focus on the needs of students through a framework of collaboration. That approach has grown to a movement that is training leadership and education.
Through the Leading Collaborative Response podcast, Kurtis and I share our own experiences of leading collaborative response and lessons learned as we continue to learn and gain insight through the experiences of working alongside others. We also have the opportunity to engage in conversations with school and divisional leaders implementing the framework in their own organizations.
We know great leaders build great teams because that is what every child deserves. Subscribe to the Leading Collaborative Response podcast and join the thousands of schools seeing success for students through intentional and focused collaborative efforts.
Welcome to another episode of Leading Collaborative Response. I'm Lorna Hewson, co-founder and lead learner of Jigsaw Learning.
And I'm Kurtis Hewson. And today we're joined by Cody Young, Vice Principal and Learning Support Teacher at Mother Teresa School. With 12 years in education, from teaching K-9 in Hayes, Alberta, to working with pre-service teachers at Medicine Hat College, Cody brings a unique perspective to collaborative response. In this conversation, we're going to dive into his leadership role in helping shape collaborative structures that support students and staff. So let's get started. Cody, so great to have you joining us here today.
Welcome, Cody.
Thanks for having me.
So, Cody, we probably need to start off with sharing a little bit more about the school you're currently at, Mother Teresa. Can you just share with listeners a little bit about just basic demographics, school population, grade configurations, and then we want to come back to your role and your background.
Yeah, so at Mother Teresa School, we are a K-6 school with an ELP program as well. We're kind of in that sweet spot of about 200 kids. Yeah, and I think the last time we actually did a survey of all the different nationalities and cultures represented in our school, and I want to say it was along the number of 21 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
We have 21 different countries represented in our school, so we have a very diverse population, which I think brings our school closer together. It really, allows kids to ask questions about other people's cultures. And so, yeah, I think it's something that makes us very unique and kind of makes us different than everybody else. So it's definitely been cool to learn about some of these cultures and work with some of these kiddos.
Awesome.
Well, Cody, we really want to focus in on your leadership experience and what has brought you to be the leader that you are today. So we'd love to be able to hear a little bit about a significant experience that you've had that impacted you as a leader.
Yeah, outside of growing up in an extremely supportive household with, parents who encouraged you to do the best you could and, expected you to, take some risks and take some opportunities, whether it was in school, sports, any of those things. It was always something we kind of grew up doing, as taking those leadership roles. But in the educational context, I think it was in actually my first year of teaching when I taught out in Hayes. And I had a principal who I know has been in this podcast before, and she was an incredible person to learn from in your first year of teaching. She taught me the importance behind relationships and effective communication. Everything she did and everything she modeled really, spoke to those two core elements or those two core values. And I think that, in working and seeing that every day, I think it's something that, originally I brought into my teaching practice, being a leader for the kids, being a leader for, the teachers on staff, supporting where I could, to now, being in this position as an administrator. Those things I think have really followed me along this process. And I think it's something that I still, hold very close to my core values and, effective communication and building relationships. It doesn't always have to be those conversations about, hey, what are you doing in language arts? Sometimes it's, how are the kids' football games on the weekend? Or, how is the hockey tournament? And, just building those, knowing the person, behind the teacher, if that makes sense. So I'd say that was, something that early on in my teaching career, last, 5 years, and I consider myself to be extremely lucky to learn from the principal I'm working with currently. Our administrative staff in the office is, such a collaborative, fun place to work, awesome people. So I think just kind of, taking, some of their strong pieces and, learning from them and working around, the things that make them successful. I've learned, other pieces of, other ways that I can be successful too. So it's been really good. And I mean, you can't forget, the you work with along the way too, that, teach you those little lessons here and there. And, you learn from them as much as they learn from you sometimes too. So kind of, a full circle thing.
Awesome. That's excellent, Cody. So, Cody, you already mentioned a little bit about the school Mother Teresa, and we know that it's located in Medicine Hat Catholic Board of Education down in southern Alberta. Is there anything else that would be valuable for us to know about the school or the division before we leap into your work around collaborative response and some key lessons learned through that initiative?
Yeah, it's an awesome school division. I'm lucky enough to work in the school division that I went through as a kid. So it's really, strange when I go to an admin meeting and I'm sitting beside people who taught me or who were my principal in the past. So that's been a really cool thing. But I think when you look at our division strategic priorities, around Catholicity, mental health and wellness, quality teaching and learning, and then the building of Holy Trinity Academy School, I think you can kind of find bits and pieces within those strategic priorities that make us a special division. And, I think once you look at some of the programs and initiatives around, the French immersion programs, fine arts, sports academies, our inclusive education initiatives, I think it really lends itself that there's a place for everybody in this school division. Whether you're a fine arts focused person, a sports person, you have challenges within your learning, there is a place for you in this division. And I think that, moving forward, I think that's an exciting thing to be a part of this division and really makes you, want to be the best, leader and teacher that you possibly can be. So lots of cool stuff going on in our division right now.
It's so interesting when you talk about a place for everyone and a place for everyone to find success, because that really is a key tenet within the collaborative response work, which is why I do think there was such a initial connection to this work.
Yeah. So, Cody, when you reflect back on your initial implementation of collaborative response, how did you even get started? And even more, what were some of those initial wins and then early challenges that you experienced?
Yeah, I think after my first meeting with Kurtis, I think my jaw kind of was on the floor of like, how am I going to do everything that this man is telling me to do?
and we should be clear for listeners, this was about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Actually, right around the time that we're recording this, I think it was about mid-May or so that we had some of those introductory conversations.
Yeah. So I remember one of the first things that Kurtis and I talked about kind of in a one-on-one kind of side conversation after one of our meetings. And I think he could tell maybe I was a little overwhelmed by everything. And he said, you know what? Take it slow. Take it in a way, or, implement it in a way that's going to work for your school. And that's exactly what we did. It wasn't let's rush to get this done or let's rush to make this successful. It was more so of let's take a slow approach. Let's make sure teachers understand the framework, the vocabulary, the model itself, and kind of the direction we wanted to go with in CRM. And kind of after kind of the first scheduled meeting, I think everyone was expecting, this big meeting with all these rules and these different roles. And it wasn't. It was a sit down and here are the main pieces of vocabulary that we're going to see within this model. Here's what they mean. Here's the framework of our CTM meetings. Here's what they're going to look like. And we just walked through each one of our CTM groups, and we just really broke things down in a way that before that first meeting, we could have some understanding. That first meeting, it wasn't that deer in the headlights look, but there was, that initial understanding of, okay, there's a timer. We can't, continue to talk about the same things round and round. We have to, wrap it up when that timer's up. There's roles. I get to interrupt people if we're going on too long. So just some of those initial things I think were, extremely, extremely helpful. And I think it helped focus our teachers that following week when we did have our first CTM meeting. I think they came in, with an understanding of the direction we wanted to go, the process of the meeting. And it was really interesting to see the focus right off the bat that they had on that key issue. One of the rules that we put in place right off the bat is when we talk about a key issue, I always want to talk about the key issue first. I don't want to know the student's name. And everybody held that one really close to them. And that was something that I think has really, really made our model here successful, is that we're very much talking about strategies and how we can help one another. And then, honestly, sometimes it gets to that point where it's like, oh yeah, who are the students that we're talking about here? We got all the strategies in the world here, but who do we need to put down on this part of the meeting? And so having that framework right off the bat, having that slow implementation, I think was really beneficial. I think some of the wins right off the bat were the buy-in from the staff and the willingness to try something different. Staff caught on quickly. I quickly recognized that they were starting to use, the language of CRM and would refer to past discussions from CTM meetings, or discussions they had in collaboration times. And it happened quickly. I want to say it happened within one of our first, couple rounds of the year. And when sometimes you implement something, the buy-in's not necessarily there right away. So to see the teacher buy-in and them using that language and, referring back to things was really, really hit home to me that, okay, we're on the right track with this. I think some of the challenges right off the bat, I think a lot of people probably say this when they're getting started, but was time.
Yeah.
Trying to schedule it in was a bit of a challenge for us at the start. And I know I had talked to Kurtis about how do I make the most use out of my time? Because at that time we were only using 30-minute blocks for our CTM meetings, and we would get going. And it was just okay, we just got to a really good point, but now we got to wrap up our time. Now in taking our CTM time to an hour-long blocks, we get way deeper into conversations. Our key issues are, way deeper. Whereas in a 30-minute block, you're kind of at those surface level questions, those surface level strategies, and you're not digging in. Whereas I feel now with those 1 hour blocks, we're really digging into some of those key issues and finding some solutions as well.
It's interesting because you said, Cody, that, you kind of get that overwhelm when you first start to learn. I actually just came out of a conversation with another leader, and they're at that place of just starting to look at, how do I make this happen in my school, and trying to explain, but not explain too much because there's a lot to learn.
Yeah,
100%.
So it's interesting, Cody, when you talk about that, we broke it down to get to, let's do small pieces, go slow.
Yeah.
And we've heard you mention numerous times now the collaborative team meeting. And I think it's so critical that you start there. That's usually our first place. Whenever schools say, whoa, this is a lot, where do we go first? We almost always say, go to that collaborative team meeting first. It's a pretty critical structure, and it will start to change. People will see small wins right away out of it, which then will build momentum. But we know that when we think of that visual framework for collaborative response, and there's 3 puzzle pieces, that blue puzzle piece is more than just the collaborative team meetings. It's all the different structures and processes and in time how they align. So I know there's more than just collaborative team meetings happening within the building now. Can you describe for us what are those layers of team that have been established at Mother Teresa and what do they look like? I know anyone listening always loves to get into specifics of who's involved, when does it happen, how does it happen, what does it look like? So break it down for us at Mother Teresa.
Yeah, so the way we schedule our model here is kind of around the concept of rounds. And each round throughout the year is broken into 5 weeks. So within those rounds, we have, our CTM meeting. That's usually the first week, which is followed by 3 weeks of collaboration time. So, and I know we'll talk, some point later on about this again, but I know that some of those collab times are based on our CTM meeting topics. Whether it's something I've given them to focus on for the week. There might be some data collection or pieces around that CTM that we're doing in collab time. Other times it's, let's dig into what some of those key issues look like, and let's, try to, build resources, do some research around it, talk to one another, look at some of your assessments. Like, what are you noticing? So, the rounds work really well for that. And something that we said right away that we think our teachers can benefit is the last week of each round is an observation. So we allow our teachers to go observe, somebody else in the school. They can, in that hour block, they can observe 2 people. They can observe somebody for 30 minutes, somebody else for 30 minutes. Maybe they're really struggling with something in their room. They're going to go to somebody in our building who, they're really strong with that. And they're going to spend an hour in there, and they're going to, observe, and they're going to ask questions, and they're going to, note some things to try. And I think some of the feedback I've got is that this is, something that the teachers enjoy. It's not something that within a day in an elementary school that you necessarily always have the time to do. So I think that, giving teachers the time to do that has been really good for us. In myself and kind of having a dual role as an administrator and a learning support teacher, it's allowed myself and our principal to have, those on the fly conversations. We've gotten really good at kind of just needing to know when they need to happen. I know the good practice or, the strongest practice is to schedule those in, but, it's working well for us. And, sometimes within those meetings we have, our school liaison counselor in there, if there's updates or anything we need along the lines of that. And then sometimes those topics from those meetings are, a focus within our CTM, or it's something that we've heard in CTMs that, what we talk about this kind of thing. So that's worked really well for us in kind of that layer. Next to the CTM meetings, which we've talked lots about, followed by, the collaboration time, which, I see a benefit in having both a focus and having it open for teachers to, investigate their own key issues.
You can have both, right?
Totally. And I've seen the benefit of both. I've seen some teachers really dig in to create some awesome resources. I've seen, a resource of the most commonly used words in grade 3. And there's a dictionary made out of it. And it's really cool. And I think the plan with this is to, have this dictionary follow them along, especially with some of our targeted students, the ones who need, that resource to help them be successful in the classroom. I think that it's an awesome tool that's, that group created. And, and even looking into data, looking into report card standards and, the percentages of outcomes that we've really, seen success in, and, maybe where we aren't seeing the success and what do we need to do around that.
Yeah.
I've talked about the teacher observations, and then kind of that last layer is that idea of the case conference piece is, maybe we've talked about this topic and this kiddo was on our radar. We get to that case conference and we refer to those as CPC meetings, where we have, service providers, we've got teachers, administrators, parents.
But focused on one kiddo at that point.
Focused on one kid. Yeah. And, really, breaking down to, where are we going? Where are we right now? What can we do as a team to support this kid? And, it stems from, working with the parents, working with the school, working with our service providers, and just really everybody digging in to try to find how we can make, our kids as successful as possible.
So, Cody, I want to come back just to, you mentioned an hour that your teams have available. I would love to know how many people are on that team. First off, that'll give a sense of how many people have to come off the floor during that hour, and how do you get them off the floor? Like what's happening to their kids while they're getting that hour time?
Yeah, so each one of our groups consists of 3 teachers, myself, and then, our principal, when she can make it. Sometimes our director of curriculum is, attending to give feedback and observations about what we're doing here, which has been extremely helpful. And, I'm lucky because our principal is a scheduling wizard, and she was able to schedule in blocks where all three teachers' kids are in a music class, a gym class, a library class, which frees up their classes to come do the collaborative response model. So it's been really beneficial in scheduling it right in our timetable. I think we all know as educators, if it's scheduled and it's in our Google Calendar, it's more than likely going to happen. It's when those things aren't scheduled that they kind of fall to the wayside and don't happen. And I think by having this model and having, the time to do it, we've seen, a reduction in the amount of those case conferences that we've had to do before the collaborative response model.
Yeah.
I would have waiting lists for months and I would have carryovers from the month prior. And it was kind of just always finding ways to, make those carryovers work and get those kiddos to be in a meeting and all those pieces. And I don't think I've had a month yet where I've had a carryover. It's helped a lot and break down those case conference meetings. So yeah.
That's excellent. That's so awesome. So Cody, a couple of times you've made reference to data and talking about how data plays a role in this. And when you look at the image that we use around collaborative response, the collaborative structures and processes, and the data and evidence and the continuum of supports, of course, they're puzzle pieces and they connect. And we always find that the power in collaborative response is when we start explicitly making connections between our teams and the use of our data. So we'd love to be able to hear a little bit about how do your teams use data in a really intentional way.
Yeah. So in our first year, I think when we thought of data, I think it was how are we ever going to do this and have a meeting about it? And it was just like this really hard thing to imagine. And then we started collaborating with other schools, collaborating with other people who've been in this process. And we decided to start small. After our first reporting term, we took all of the literacy and numeracy outcomes for grades 1 to 6 that were assessed. And we broke it down into the percentages of those students in those grades who received, we call them indicators on our report cards, but marks or whatever it might be. Where were they? Where were our high percentages? Were they in those top tiers of our report card indicators? Or did we have high percentages of students not understanding the outcomes? And so we started going through this data and we started analyzing, where are those really successful spots? And we started, the color coding, the green, the red. So we started looking into that. And it was interesting that when teachers started to see those hot spots, where maybe the percentage was a little higher than we wanted to see with students maybe not getting those top level indicators, right away, without me even really prompting, they were starting to build strategies about what they were going to do.
Yeah.
And the conversation became very intentional. It became, okay, we need to work on these 3 things. Here's what they are. Here's how I'm going to implement them. And then that kind of struck with me as, okay, well, I think we need to do another team meeting on this.
Yeah.
So then we did a team meeting on the strategies. How are we going to get there? And, I seen a lot of teachers become very intentional with what they were doing. They had a clear-cut plan. And then at the beginning of one of our next CTM meetings, we just did a quick, reflection on it. And I think, Lorna, that might have been the one you've seen.
Yeah.
Where we just touched base for the first 5 or 10 minutes of the meeting just to see how our strategies were going. Are we seeing any benefits to this? Are we seeing any growth? And it was really interesting to see our teachers, sort through the data like that and become just very intentional with the direction they wanted to go. And following that, we started looking into our ISPs a little bit deeper, mostly around the concept of executive functioning. And we started looking at, kiddos in our classrooms with strategies and goals around executive functioning. And, as a classroom teacher and my role as an LST, do we know the strategies? Are those strategies in the back of our head as we know we're working with those kiddos and, we're noticing these things? Are we pivoting to those strategies? Are we aware who has them? So really digging into that, creating a spreadsheet, by homeroom, and then just really breaking down, here are the strategies that they need. And it was just check boxes that we would go through. And then there was a a piece where we could have other information or strategies that worked. And that
Mm-hmm.
seemed to kind of really get teachers thinking about, oh yeah, like I need to make sure that I'm adding that process to my day, or, I'm implementing those strategies for that group of students. And right now we're in the midst of our transition document, which we started last year. So each homeroom teacher, and it's super helpful for me as the LST, but they go through and they kind of, they list their students that, are receiving outside services. So if they're seeing, speech or occupational therapy or PT or, whatever it might be, we have that on there. We have, if they have ISP support, if they have an SRSP, where are they, within the levels of literacy levels, numeracy levels, socio-emotional levels.
Yeah.
And then this chart gets shared with next year's teacher. And then they have an idea of, okay, here are the pieces of documentation. Here are the services that this student needs to see. And it helps me at the beginning of the year because I can go through that list. And when, our service providers reach out and they're like, hey, Cody, like, who are we seeing this year? I used to kind of have that deer in the headlights look like, who are you seeing this year? Now I've got, evidence, I've got my data, I've got, all these pieces that the teachers have helped build, which makes the beginning of the year process so much easier.
Awesome.
That's
and just to be
beautiful.
clear, just because we have lots of people in different locations and we often have the understanding of, okay, we see lots of different acronyms and things going. ISP would be individualized support plans. Yes?
Correct.
Yeah. Awesome. So, Cody, again, Lorna referred to that overall framework visual, and we've talked through the collaborative structures and processes. And I loved how you said we didn't look at all three of the foundational components to start with. We picked one and just started to build it out and then started to infuse our data and evidence. Well, there's one more foundational component that we want to get to, and that's the continuum of supports. The idea that over time, how can we get really clear on what are the responses that we'll have? You mentioned the creation of strategies. Well, how do we start to clearly articulate and document those through our tiered structure? So love for you to just share, what does that work look like thus far in the school, and maybe even where you see it going moving forward. We'll be right back to continue this episode.
In the spring, we often find ourselves stretched between two worlds, with one foot in the year wrapping up and the other foot in the year to come. This messy middle presents many challenges, but also provides opportunities to learn from the past and plan for the future. Join us for the online workshop, Planning for Fall Startup, Re-engaging Collaborative Response, part of our Supporting Collaborative Response series. In this on-demand workshop, I will share 5 ways to reflect on learnings from the current school year and 5 considerations for planning for the new year. I'll also be sharing numerous resources, templates, and samples that will support you in your learning. Access this on-demand workshop and you'll have the ability to view, replay any or all of the workshop when it best fits your time. Register today to learn more about how the Fall Startup can be an excellent opportunity to re-energize your school's collaborative response efforts.
And now back to our conversation.
Yeah, so our continuum of supports, if you've ever worked with Kurtis and Lorna, they have many, many examples from other schools and school divisions to kind of get you thinking about what this looks like. So when I started doing that, I almost had too many ideas. And I was kind of trying to take things from other places and make it fit. And I was like, this doesn't work. We need to see what we're doing in our building. Yeah. So we started off using, in the last 2 years, we've created a literacy, numeracy, and then social-emotional continuum of supports. And I think a lot of these were generated from, teachers in conversation. Here's what I do, when I have a kiddo who's struggling with reading or writing, check out this program, or, hey, I'm going to send you some resources. And it just kind of started naturally happening within our CTM meetings. It started happening within our collaboration times. And as I'm hearing these things, I'm going to my Google slide and I'm plugging them all in. And then, the first time I presented it to teachers within a round of CTM, I just said, you know what, here's where here's where we are right now. Is there anything I'm missing? And almost instantly, teachers are like, oh yeah, like where's this? And why don't you have this on there? We need to have this. We need to have
Of
this.
course.
Like, holy cow, okay. So yeah.
Which I want to interrupt because that just demonstrates what we always say overall is there's so much expertise in your building. How do you capture it?
Yeah.
To then be able to utilize it as you continue moving forward. Great example of that right there.
Yeah, and me being a little bit more of a tech guy, I kind of went the tech route of things. The text to speech, those kind of tools and websites and apps, and there was a few teachers within my first CTM meeting with that being presented that were like, whoa, like we're forgetting some of the basics here. And I went, you are right.
Yeah.
I said, like, let's list them off here, and I started adding them and really, taking a step back and saying, you know what, this document's not a me thing. This is a we thing. And really, feeding off their expertise. We are extremely lucky here to have, the teachers that we do and the experience and, professionalism and expertise. And it's been so good to work with through them. But that was one of those moments where I was like, ooh, I tried maybe doing this a little bit on my own, and that one backfired a little bit. So it was really good to see them to step up. Yeah.
It's great that your teachers just jumped in and said, well, there are still some other things we need to consider. That's awesome.
Totally. And I can honestly say, like, in looking at our continuum of supports and, whether I'm stopping in classrooms or I'm walking by or, I'm talking with teachers or I'm hearing from kids, like, I know these things are being used in the classroom. And I know that, they're not all going to work for every student. But we've got lots of pieces in our continuums to try and, experiment with and really just try to, figure out what's going to work the best for, that individual or that group of individuals to be successful in the classroom. Some of the work that I know that, from an LST perspective that we're working on kind of in the future is we've really dug into the Wyatt 4, which is the new level B academic testing kit.
Yeah.
And right now we're doing some work around creating a continuum of supports for each one of the subtests. So once we get the results from that academic assessment, we can really say, okay, you know what? Like right now, for instance, we're working on decoding fluency. And so if, they have a really low score there, we can start looking at, okay, well, here are some of the strategies, or here are some of the resources, or here are some of the tools that we can use for this student to try to make them more successful within that piece. And that's been just totally a 100% collaborative effort from, our learning services team, all the LSTs within our meetings, and kind of having those conversations
from across schools, right?
Yeah, from all of our schools, from elementary schools to high schools, and just really, what's working for you, or what's your experience with this, and some of those stories about experiences really start, setting those light bulbs off, and boy, you know what, I didn't even think of that. We could just tweak it a bit, or differentiate a bit for it to fit at a grade 3 or a grade 4 level, and really just kind of to take it from there and just give it a try. So I think it's something that's very new, and we're in the very beginning processes of it. But I think it's something that when it's completed is going to be extremely helpful for teachers and students.
That's such exciting work. And when you start accessing, like you have so much expertise in your own building, but being able to access what's across schools is really incredible too.
I think the part there that's really important to think about as well is we often say the document, the continuum of supports is valuable on its own, but the utilizing it as a mechanism to talk about practice over and over is probably its greater value, which is exactly demonstrated there through the creation. We're just leveraging conversations and understandings and accessing everybody's toolboxes to impact everyone system-wide in this perspective.
Cody, I have to ask you a question though, because a little bit earlier you talked a little bit about executive functioning, and that you had really explored that idea of What are the skills and strategies that each student, each classroom is looking at in terms of executive functioning? And I just have to ask the question, are you going to build a continuum around executive functioning?
We'll be right back to continue this episode.
Are you frustrated by the constant need for higher levels of support for your students? Are your resources stretched thin as more and more students are identified as requiring those intensive supports? Over the past number of years, with the growth of tiered response systems in schools, educational organizations have become proficient at tiering students for intensifying levels of support. However, I would suggest that we stop tiering our students. Tier how adults support those students instead. My name is Lorna Hewson, lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning. In this free webinar, I'm going to be sharing 5 considerations when developing a continuum of supports that tiers the supports, not the students. Throughout this webinar, I will share resources and samples to support your work back in your school. So excited to have you join me to learn more about shifting away from tiering our students to creating a continuum of supports that articulates how adults in the building can ensure all students' needs are met.
And now back to our conversation.
I do think so. Like, I think that it's one of those things that we put the work into understanding this year.
Yeah.
I would hate to see it just kind of fall off or go to the wayside. I think it would be something within kind of what we're doing with that Wyatt kit right now, where I think that some of those things maybe go hand in hand. So I think, working with that continuum of supports within that regard, I think is something that I could totally see us doing.
Yeah, and those would totally fit within each
100%.
other too. Yeah.
So Cody, we always like asking within these podcast conversations, how would you go about finishing this statement? As a result of collaborative response, we have seen.
I would say we've seen a more collaborative educational community that's willing to put the work in to see their students succeed. Hats off to all the teachers and administrators who work with this model. It seems like a lot of work at the beginning, and I mean, it is a lot of work in establishing a new program or a new framework in your building. But I think once people see how successful it can be, I think they're willing to dig in, and they're willing to put that work into to find the most success they can for their kids. And that's something that I've really seen in our building.
I know Lorna's got a question that we ask everyone, but to me, I think it'll be super interesting because you started off this saying, we saw this whole framework and right away, overwhelmed. How are we going to do all of this stuff? Hit them with the question that we always ask.
Okay, Cody. So in the spirit of if you knew then what you know now, what advice would you give to your past self in relation to this collaborative response work?
So that past self being that overwhelmed individual sitting in that room going,
what could you tell
what
him
is
back
this
then?
guy talking about?
Yeah, I would say the first piece would be exactly what Kurtis and I talked about after that first meeting is go at the pace that works best for your school understanding, really build the understanding of the framework, develop those structures and processes in a way that, works for your staff and your team. Our staff, I feel like we did that slow implementation, but then I think our staff learned a lot by doing and just experiencing and trying and, being willing to dive in head first without, what ifing it or, I don't really want to do this, but they dove in head first. They were willing. And I think we learned a lot together through the doing part of the framework, which was great. Don't be scared to connect and collaborate with other schools. I don't know how many phone calls I made to other administrators in a division. My wife works in another school division. So, having conversations with her because, she was a little bit, further ahead in it than I was. And, just having conversations about, if this was your school, how would you look at implementing it? Or, do you think this would work? And there were so many times where she's like, well, I don't know. And then all of a sudden it turns into dinner conversation. And I'm like, hey, you and I decided we weren't going to talk about work at the dinner.
We understand that dinner
We know.
conversation.
Yeah. So especially the first couple of months, like I think it was probably a weekly conversation that we had about, just, what did this look like when you did it at your last school, or, what are some pieces you would recommend doing, and just, kind of having those conversations, talking to other school divisions, talking with, the experts in your own building, getting some feedback, from teachers in your building, like, what would you like to see? Or, did this work for us? Was this meaningful? And I think that, making sure things were meaningful was really important for us in our building. Yeah. And then having, the more people you can have involved, whether they're involved in the meeting or they're watching your meeting just to give you feedback, I think that was something that for myself and being the facilitator for our meetings was super helpful. Our director of curriculum observed, 3 or 4 meetings throughout the year. And every time he came in, there was always, something that like, this was really good. And, there's a lot of growth going on here. But then there was always something in a super positive way that, hey, have you ever considered this? Or, have you, thought about, changing the way that this maybe flows within your meeting? Or, it was always a positive kind of feedback. Like never once throughout this entire process of implementation was there any negativity or any like, Cody, what are you doing? Like there was never any of that. It was always just very, that growth mindset piece. Like that was always just something that I always appreciated about this model, is that, we're going to make mistakes and it's not always going to be perfect, but we're going to learn from them. And, we are going to grow through this model. So I think that, with all the feedback, conversations, just working with people, I think, those would be the biggest pieces of getting started for advice that I would give.
That was awesome. Well, Cody, it has been such a pleasure just chatting with you and talking through all that leadership lessons through collaborative response. How can our listeners get in touch with you?
Honestly, the easiest way is email. I've got my email attached to every device that I own. So, I get one email and I got 5 or 6 different devices dinging at me. So I probably won't miss an email. So yeah, if you have any questions or you just want to collaborate, talk about, different pieces, just shoot me an email, cody.young@mhcbe.ab.ca.
Excellent.
Awesome. And we'll make sure that's included in the show notes here as well. Cody, this has been outstanding. And yeah, we wish you all the best. This is being recorded here in May. So as people are hearing it, we're wishing everyone best as you move through what we've come to affectionately refer to as Majune, that hectic end of the school year, but wishing you all the best. And thank you so much for being able to share your insights.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Cody.
All right. So we always ask the question, if you could go back to your previous self, what advice would you give? That reflective question.
But Cody set it up for us.
Yeah, Cody did set it up right from the start to say, when I first was introduced, I was overwhelmed. How would we do this? And I'm so glad that he articulated that out, because that's almost always the first impression is you kind of have to give the big picture to understand how everything fits together, but then peel it back to focus in on what small piece to do first. And I love that, being able to share that out with anyone that's listening to this.
Well, and he said several times throughout our time that you just have to start small.
Yeah.
You look at what you already have in place, and then to look at what are some small changes that we can make, or small additions that we can make, and really focusing in on that collaborative team meeting.
But when you start small, and he said we went slow to create clarity, and make sure we got clarity, and then we could start to ramp up our work, and then bring in the next element, and then the next element, but at a pace. That was the word that stood out for me, pace. At a pace that is comfortable, but still moving forward for us.
I love that Cody was talking about the teachers using the language. So once they got started on it, they would hear consistent common language that was coming from collaborative response. And so that really signifies that they have a deep understanding of what it is that we're doing.
Yeah.
And if they're using that language consistently, it really helps everything to make those connections and ties.
Absolutely. So for those that are watching or listening that didn't know this, I grew up in a farming community, and a big part of that was 4-H. And for those that have gone through 4-H that are listening to this, you probably know where I'm going. If you have not, I'm going to reveal that the motto within 4-H is learn to do by doing. And Cody exemplified that in the conversation of being able to say, we learn so much by just doing the work, getting in and getting messy. And that's, I think, is really, really key in the collaborative response work.
I love that they have set it up in rounds, what they call their rounds.
Yeah.
And they have explicitly laid out what happens in those rounds. And part of that being teachers having the opportunity to observe each other. And that's an exciting component of the work that they're doing.
So this is the interesting thing. As we record these episodes, this one will be released in May, but just before having this conversation with Cody, I recorded for our other podcast, Building a Culture of Collaboration. Check it out if you haven't yet. And I was talking with an instructional coach who said one of the things that she really sees as being critical for our profession moving forward is having opportunities to get into other classrooms, to see what others' teaching looks like, to be able to learn from that, and to think about, Cody, I asked it as, what do you see on the frontier where we should be moving towards? And for Mother Teresa to say, well, that's just part of our rounds. That's what we do.
Yeah. So
super
great.
Exciting. All right. So as always, share this episode out. We'd love for you to like, subscribe as we continue to build up this understanding and this amazing community of educators and leaders that really are transforming our systems to ones where we are collaboratively responding to each and every student. And it really comes down to what we believe with our core values, and that idea that every child deserves a team. So how do we establish it effectively within our schools? So wish you all the best. Reach out if you have questions. And until next time, take care.
See you soon.
For more on collaborative response, visit jigsawlearning.ca or join the JL Insider to receive access to newly added resources and content. Make sure to follow us on social media. Subscribe to the podcast and the Jigsaw Learning YouTube channel to access past and upcoming episodes. Join us again to continue to build your own capacity in leading collaborative response in your context.